Welcome to Books on Point. According to PWC's Entertainment and Media Outlook for South Africa, the growth rate for physical books is moderate and they are performing far better than any other non-digital sector. The report notes that books are seen as collectables, often owned and displayed for many years, making the loss of their physical presence more significant. Although books currently seem to have the best prospects of any physical media format, they are, like every other segment, still subject to disruptive digital competitors, and that could bring in some major upheaval. So we thought, why not look at the publishing industry in South Africa? And to do that, we're going to have a conversation with Eugene Ashton, who's the CEO of Jonathan Ball Publishers. Eugene, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. A lot of our listeners, or rather even our viewers, have been wanting to know, how do you get into the publishing industry? And they want to publish books, which is a good thing, I suppose. But perhaps you can take us through the landscape when you look at the publishing industry, both globally and how South Africa compares.
Okay, so I think you've asked three questions there. Firstly, how do you get into the publishing industry? That's relatively straightforward. I think you just apply again. And the best route of entry has always historically been working in a bookshop. I think how to get published is a slightly more complex question. I think that's best answered by saying that you should write something and you should write it to completion and then send it to a publisher. And then your main question, what's the landscape like? Well, at the moment, it's absolutely ghastly for physical books, given the lockdown. But your point about the publishing industry at large is absolutely right. And yes, it's growing. Physical books remain a very competitive entertainment option for many people, and continues to grow the world out. People like stories, people like books, and they like to be entertained, and books are on point, as it were.
A year ago, some people would say that some of the challenges that the consumer book segment was experiencing was low incomes, there's illiteracy, and of course the fact that there are very few books that are published in African languages. Is that still a case and a challenge for our consumer book segment?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think that publishing in African languages is still there's a massive catch up that has to happen in terms of getting books to market. But it's not. It's on the increase, and we're seeing more and more in bookshops books by South African authors for South African readers. Selling in volumes. That certainly means that publishers are focusing a lot of their attention on making sure that they publish these sorts of books. So it's an absolutely growing segment, and yes, it might be lagging slightly in terms of getting books to market, but publishers follow the market. They don't necessarily create it in this instance.
Right. Now, I must admit, Eugene, I'm very old school in the way that I like to publish my books. I'm the type to walk into a bookstore, smell a good book and, feel the pages. But there are some people who still like buying things via, the electronic format of consuming your books. The penetration rate when you look at electronic consumer segment in South Africa, are people buying more books via the internet?
One has to make a quick little distinguishing thing over here. So on-screen versus bricks and mortar. So certainly on-screen purchasing of both physical and digital books is on the increase, and now probably represents in South Africa something like about 10 or 12% of the total market. In terms of actual digital content in South Africa, so speaking specifically about ebooks, it probably represents between 6 and 8% of the total consumer market in South Africa in terms of what we're able to track. But the most interesting segment is, in fact, audiobooks. And that's the sector that's growing the fastest because it seems to appeal to reluctant readers. So you have people who are not necessarily the sorts of people who would buy either physical or ebooks, but who do want to read and therefore resort to listening to audiobooks as an alternative. And that segment is probably growing at 300 or 400% at the moment, year on year, and globally probably at a rate of about 50 or 60%.
I think most industries at this point have been affected by COVID, be it when it comes to the disruption of events or whatever else companies were working on. For the publishing industry, what kind of disruptions have you seen as a result of the lockdown that's, taken place?
I think that we're like everybody else where you're in any sort of consumer non-essential supply chain. There's been a complete stoppage in terms of the sale of physical books. The good news is that digital ebooks are still available and people are certainly buying those. The impact, I think, might in the long term be quite positive, because I'm hoping that as I speak to you, many of the authors that we are publishing are actually writing books.
Right. So people would want to know, we've discussed the landscape of publishing, but perhaps you can talk to us about the people involved from manuscript right up until I actually pick up my physical book at a bookstore.
It's quite a long process, but it generally begins with an idea. So if we take it right from the beginning, somebody has an idea for a book and they write it. The most important thing over there is actually just writing it to completion. You can't really do anything with an idea until it's down on paper. What typically happens is that it's sent internationally. It would be sent to an agent in South Africa. We tend to just take books directly from authors, so they're sent to publishers. There's somebody who assesses the book, so typically a reader. If it passes the first reader, it generally gets sent out to an independent third party who will then evaluate the manuscript and come back with a recommendation to publish or not publish. It then goes through the publishing process, which basically entails two parts of editorial. You generally have one person who focuses on the big edit, as it were, making sure that ideas are in the right place, making sure that the book flows, and then it goes to a line editor who checks literally line for line that everything is right and the punctuation is correct and so on, and there are no grammatical errors. It then goes for typesetting, typically, and is then sent to the author to check, and then it goes to the printers and it's printed, and from there it's sold into bookshops, and as they say, the rest is hopefully history.
Well, Eugene, we'll have to leave there. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure we'll have more conversations looking at the book landscape in South Africa. That is Eugene Ashton, who is the CEO of Jonathan Ball Publishers, talking to us about the publishing industry in South Africa and how everything works. And hopefully that will inspire you to use the lockdown period for a time to write down your thoughts and maybe publish that long-awaited book. That's it from me, Nastasia Aransa. We'll be back with your news after the break.